Hello. I am inviting David Stark. David Stark. I'll try again. Hello, hello. Waiting for David Stark to join me for 52 weeks of design live.
Hey, hey, hey.
Hi.
How are
How
you?
are you?
Good. Do we have a decent connection?
I think so.
Okay, good.
My side, I think.
I'm in Switzerland. I'm in Interlaken, Switzerland. I'm in a different time zone than you. And
What are you working on?
I am looking at some site visit. I'm making site visits for a potential, well, a series of events in 2024 that we need to find locations and hotels and all that jazz. So I'm in Interlaken, Switzerland.
Okay. So,
It's not terrible.
no, it sounds amazing. It's a very grumpy day out. So tell me how you got into this business and how you go about your job, having led with, I'm looking for 2024 spaces, venues, hotels. I want to hear the whole gamut because I don't think I have a real idea of how it's done.
Okay. So I got involved in this purely by accident. When I went to art school and I majored, I was, trying to be a painter.
And where were we?
And I was at the Rhode Island School of Design.
Mhm.
And so, when I was in school, I didn't know that this was a this. I had no idea that this was a career. I had no idea it was a job. I had no idea you could get paid for it. But when I came to New York and I went to graduate school and I got out of graduate school, a couple of things happened. I guess one thing was throughout graduate school, I was a really, 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 really good waiter. I worked at like every hot, cool restaurant, and every
What were
time, like
you studying in graduate school?
painting.
Okay, good. And
So,
did you stay at RISD for graduate?
I did not. I got my undergraduate degree at RISD. I went to the School of Visual Arts for my MFA.
Yeah.
Throughout my MFA time, I worked in restaurants that supported my life, and it was also really fun. It was like an instant social life, and you always had cash in your pocket, and it was simpler times. And but I also knew that I didn't want to be, working in a restaurant for the rest of my life. But because I was so good at it, I knew that if I didn't make a big change, I would be doing that for the rest of my life. So I started to work with flowers. Yeah. So I started to work with flowers as a way to support my painting. And it was, it was a creative solution to making money. Like painting, it was color and form and texture. And, it was like painting in a different kind of medium, right? And started with doing like, little tiny jobs, like an arrangement in a real estate office, and a couple of bud vases for a restaurant. I had a partner at the time that I did this with, and we'd bill $50 and we'd spend $300. It was like not really a viable business at that time. But one little job got to be a little bit of a bigger job, which got to be a little bit of a bigger job. And I think maybe the trick was that, if it was a $50 arrangement, we approached it as if it was like a $10 million job.
Which is a great philosophy.
we put like everything into it. We put like heart and soul and love, and we were like making art, right? So like you know, we were just going to put everything into it. And people noticed, and like little things led to a little bit of bigger things, and that led to even more. And somewhere along the way, we realized we were really doing this. We were no longer painters with a side job. We said, let's do this. And um, my partner and I, we worked out of our loft in Brooklyn, which is where my painting studio was. And when we needed to hire an employee, we threw away the sofa to make way for a desk. And when we needed to hire a second employee, we threw away, the chair for another desk. And, that partner and I grew apart, and I continued on in this business and he did not. But somewhere along the way, we were invited to speak to New York City Opera about doing the decor for their gala. It was a big opportunity for us, like these two schmoes in Brooklyn. And Carolyn Rome was the chair lady of the event. And of course, she's a very noted floral person in her own right.
Oh yeah.
And so we brought our portfolio, and she took a look at it, and she said, well, there's no question that you don't make the most gorgeous flower arrangements, but the truth is, this event is not about flowers at all. And like my mind blew, like this whole idea that like you could use something else, like who would have ever thought of something so crazy? And at this point, she probably would have no idea who I am. She probably doesn't remember that at all. But it was actually a really life-changing thing for me, because she opened up the idea that the world of materials was a palette possibility. And when I started to realize that you could use anything, that's where things started to happen. And so flowers are still an important tool in my toolbox, but I'm conscious of the fact that it's a good tool for certain kinds of projects, and it's not the right tool for other kinds of projects.
So what did you end up doing on that project at the opera?
We built these giant towers of industrial scaffolding in front of, the two big statues that are in the David Koch Theater in the lobby. So we built these.
They're big. The ones on the
they look like they're carved out of soap. They're big figures. They might be. I don't know. I don't think they are, but like of the family of. And so we built these big industrial scaffolding shelves that went around them, and we would put candles on all of the shelves. And the opera was 3 acts long. And so all of the tables were hiding between the acts, because between the acts, the audience would come out and hang out on the promenade, and then they'd go back in. So we would like climb up the scaffolding, light the ones on the top, keep coming down, get as far as we can. Right before they came out of the theater for an intermission, we would like scurry away. The candles would be only as lit as far as we got. They'd go back in the theater. We'd climb back up and continue. And we kept going until we got to the bottom. And then the tables had these, giant displays of candles. And, it was only candles. And it was really revolutionary at the time, like the whole idea that there was not a single flower in the house, and that you could do all of it. Like today we look at that and, we think, of course you can. And like, how dumb, like that's not revolutionary. But at that moment in time,
you would never.
It was like a big deal. Yeah. So, so somewhere along the way, I went from being a florist to an event designer, and now an event producer, event planner, event design, like all these different things.
And verb is hard to peg because there's a lot going on.
Yeah. And like, I don't know that all of those things were a thing then, but now it's the thing I do. So, that's something like 28 years later or something like that. So,
I wonder if we were in Rhode Island at the same time. So tell me if you can, I'm sure you're not allowed to talk about the gigs you're working on, but in the most general terms, without names, tell me about what you're doing right now.
Like what I'm doing in Switzerland?
Yeah.
So, it's for a corporation, an American corporation, who takes their highest, performing individuals on incentive trips. So it'll ultimately be 6 days for these group of high performing individuals as a thank you, as 160 people.
And you do their entire trip?
I don't do their entire trip, but I do all the entertaining. So, we partner with a destination management company that handles the travel, the hotels, like afternoon activities. But every night they come do something glamorous and we're in charge of that.
Wow. I mean, it is a job now, but it's still kind of out there. Like there's so many of us
Yeah.
who don't experience things like that. Like we know they're going on, but,
Yeah.
but we're not invited.
Well, that's right. And I think also, look, they're real experiences, they're real immersive experiences. And they're wonderful ways to travel because you're seeing things, you're getting access to, and you're seeing things in a different way than, like if you and I just booked a trip and went to a hotel and arrived in a city, what we would find on our own, right? So, they're really fun in that respect. And then, they're also a challenge because, 6 nights in a row, you need to come up with something that's extremely different. And that's everything from menu planning. You go to, in Switzerland, I mean, I've now had many meals, and on the menus every night are, some of the same meals. So they do, a trout cooked in butter and potatoes, and it's actually really yummy, but like you don't want to have it 6 nights in a row. So some of it is about like finding the way into a local experience, but having enough variety so that you feel like you're getting lots of different facets of the experience. Same thing with like the look and feel. Of course you're confronted with the idea of Saint Bernard's greeting your guests, and fondue, and like we went for fondue one day. Like that's more fondue than I think I need to have in like the next 10 years. So like we would
I'm
do it once.
a fondue eater henceforth. There's no such thing as too much fondue in my world.
We had like raclette and fondue in one day, and I was like reeling from it. But look, it's really fun, and the Alps are like, incredibly extraordinary. Like it's really fun, but it's also a really challenge because everywhere I go, I need to invent, how do we do this from scratch? When I'm in New York City and I have my studio and we have all of our resources and everything, that's hard enough. I'm not going to suggest that that's not, crazy making. But then you go someplace else in the world and you're reinventing the wheel.
So how much time do you spend doing research and development for a given event?
Well, this one, we're specking this out for 2024.
And no, but how much time are you spending in Interlaken prior?
Oh, we'll probably go back 2 or 3 times.
Do you go
And
idea in mind, or do you
not
go
so much
feel it and
feel it. I mean, this trip is entirely about finding things,
mhm.
and like finding those things that we feel like will have um something inspiring for our guests and be a different kind of experience. And um you know there's many things that factor into it, like what does the arrival feel like there might be something that's like awesome inside, but the arrival's like not so great. And so like, does that feel like the perfect thing? Or there's, I mean, the people that I'm with, they all went hand gliding today, and that's like definitely not my thing. So I didn't do that. But like they had such an incredible time that they want to build a location around that because they just loved it. So there's a lot of research that goes into trying to determine what it is. But when I do a destination wedding, that's a different kind of experience. Like we're going with a purpose.
Mhm.
That's different than this kind of incentive trip purpose, which is, the incentive trip purpose is like purely about enjoyment, team building, and entertaining. And a wedding, somebody's getting married. So like there are specific things around, what that initiative is all about, that we focus on.
Okay. Because I'm so fascinated and I really want to go on one of these trips, and I'm upset that I don't work for this American company. And
Well, you can make your own version of
such
it. I'll plan it for you.
Well, maybe we can't talk about this one because you're not finished planning it. So, do you frequently do trips that last this long? 60 days?
No, I mean, I would say that most of the work that I do is in the United States and specifically in New York, and they're specifically sort of one night experiences. And
Like, do you have to storyboard this trip?
oh, I do. I have to like, I mean, I will tell you that, I never stop auditioning. Like there's nonstop audition happening. So, I mean, the decks and the storyboards and the drawings and the swatches and the tap dancing and like that doesn't ever change. Like no matter however accomplished I may or may not be, and
Yeah.
no matter how many things have proven successfully, I'm still auditioning.
Yeah, that's a good way to keep honest, right? All of
You
us.
know, a wise person once said that you should always be hungry as if you never had the job before, right?
That person also has no idea of the compound effect of stress. But yeah. Um,
Totally.
so what give me like a highlight project you've done, because I find this very, very heady stuff. Like it sounds so exciting because it's of course beauty, it's experience, but it's also there's so much fantasy involved. And
Yeah.
I love it when fantasy is embraced.
Yeah. Oh, Alexa, there's so many different examples. I mean, I do so many different kinds of events. I mean, I love to plan social events. I mean, I throw a mean bar mitzvah. I love a wedding. Give me a 50th birthday party. I mean, I like it all. We do a lot of corporate work, whether that's, in the fashion world or, in media or, and I mean, we're very involved in pop-up retail and all that stuff. And I love all of that. And then I also love, I do a lot of fundraising stuff. So whether that's, non-for-profit galas for, the Carnegie Halls of the world or the Metropolitan Operas. So I have a lot of things that are really meaningful to me for a lot of different reasons in all of those aspects of it. So it's really hard to like have your favorite child. But I mean, I do remember some of the travel experiences. I mean, once I did, and there's wonderful things that you learn about a culture by working and traveling to that culture. Like, I've done a certain amount of work in Japan. We once did the opening of a big Coach flagship store there, and I remember, they don't really use paint that often in Tokyo. Like the way we paint things, like if you had a pedestal and you wanted it to be ivory, you'd pick out your paint and you'd paint it. There, they sort of wallpaper it.
Mhm.
And they have, in the same way that Benjamin Moore would have a fan book of like 20,000 different colors, they would have a paper book like that. And it's just, a different
Right.
approach.
The toolbox.
Yeah.
Ooh, you froze. You're frozen. Or I'm frozen. But I say you're frozen. David, come back. Hold on, everybody. Give it a minute. Shoot. Hold on, let me see if I can get him back. This is so fascinating. Hi.
And we're back.
Okay, so I lost. It's a different toolbox.
Yeah, so one time I did, I mean, there's a lot of different examples. We once did a big wedding in Caracas.
Mhm. Shoot. Okay, guys, we're going to figure this out. I don't know how, but we're going to figure it out. Why was it working and now it's not? How temperamental can you get? Hi. Oh, look. Change of place.
Yes, I moved to the desk thinking maybe we would get a better little surge of airwaves here.
Okay. Um,
So the last thing that I
how-
was saying is we once did a big event in Caracas, Venezuela, and we were doing it during the time where Chavez was coming into power and there was a coup happening. And it became so dangerous that we had to flee the country. And we kept security in a tent.
to the idea of a party fleeing.
Uh, so we left the country, and security was kept in the tent for 24 hours a day for a full year. And when things calmed down, we went back, and everything was exactly where we left it, and we started all over again. So like there are things like that that are really memorable from these travel experiences that are hard to, like who could predict things like that?
Yeah. Um, Gosh, what's the most? Give me like wow me with the fantasy of one of your events.
Uh,
I'm only asking because I'm greedy to live vicariously through your description. It all sounds so like, well, first of all, for anybody who's watching this, again, this is David Stark. He has a new book out called At the Artisan's Table. So these are um, images of beautiful events or settings. And
mhm.
anyone, right? As long as they've got money.
Well, some of the ideas are actually really simple ideas made with everyday things that anybody could do if they, you know, wanted to put their mind towards it.
But anyone
But
can pick up the
yes,
phone to you and hire you.
sure.
Yeah, cool. How
I
big
mean,
is your?
people call off of Instagram all the time. It always blows my mind, but they do.
Yeah, yeah. Instagram is part of our life. Um, how big is your team?
I have about 32 people that work full time, and I have 150-ish people that work part time when we have jobs that require us to flex and grow.
Right, right.
So it's
Um,
bigger than a bread box, but it's not IBM.
yeah, that happily. What was your experience of COVID? I can imagine it was tough.
Yeah, it wasn't easy. I mean, honestly, we were busy. We sent an awful lot of boxes of things to people. So,
Hmm.
like, event in a box. We did a certain amount of virtual events. We moved an awful lot of events around on the calendar and kept moving them and canceling them and moving them. Um, and we reduced our size, and that was a very difficult thing to do, but we all banded together, and I'm proud of how we kind of built things back up. Um, but yes, I'm in a business that's entirely about people gathering. And when you're in a time where people can't gather, there's not a lot of business for that.
Yeah. When did you feel the boot come off your neck? Was it
Uh,
2021, 22?
I think it was sort of like the third or fourth quarter of 21, definitely 22. I have to say that I feel like it was a valuable time also because a lot of my colleagues, we all banded together. We kind of supported each other. Um, there were people in my life that were, very kind. I mean, I would say that our landlord, where our studio and our office was, they were incredible partners to us through this time period. I would say that the government help was really great. I think that there were a lot of things to be thankful for. And I think there was a lot of value that, we were able to really shine a spotlight on the value of what our industry is about, that bringing people together is important. And you really know that more when you can't do it, right? And, I think a lot of people would go to things because there was an obligation to do so. But at the end of the day, um, you know, people are really valuing the times that they get to spend with other people now. I think
Oh, yeah.
that's incredible.
Yeah, definitely.
How about you? How did COVID affect you, you know, your world?
Um, it was just totally erratic. There were times
Hmm.
of wandering around the house, wondering like, is this happening? And then,
Yeah.
oh, this is, and like the kids wandering around looking for desks. The having, the whole thing was very, very
Yeah.
strange. Very strange. I
Yeah.
was watching a lot of, in the first year, just tons of news,
Uh-huh.
which did not help my mental health. It's still so bizarre. It's so bizarre that we're going to have this decisive cut that everything is going to be pre or post.
Yeah.
Maybe not everybody feels this way, but I definitely feel like I will be living two different lives, and it
Yeah.
coincided with my being going from kids to teens. So they
Yeah.
came in one group of people and they've left as a different. Um, but I do think, like I was saying about thinking of your events and thinking of fantasy that goes into them. I feel this way about design. I feel like fantasy for me now has become more important because it is so joyful. Because
Yeah.
it's rational. It's just something that can bring you joy.
Yeah. Well, I think about, you know, I often think about the difference between what I do and, you know, interior design that's meant to last for longer than 6 hours or one night. And, you know, I actually think you have it a lot harder than I do, or design, you know, interior designers and interior architects have it a lot harder than I do because, you know, I'm my people are committing to something for 6 hours, and they're sometimes able to embrace fantasy more because it isn't something that they're supposed to live with for the next 10 or 12 years.
Yeah,
Um,
I have no doubt there are as many difficulties particular to your business as there are particular. Um,
yeah, I'm sure also, you know, you get calls of things that broke 6 months or 8 months in. Like, I never have to deal with that because mine doesn't have to last more than 6 hours. So,
what
uh,
words for people who are, what's something that we would never think about that we need to know
what about what I do?
about having an event about, yeah, well, I mean, I can't even imagine all the things that I can't think of that are concerns for you.
Oh, you know, there are so many things that are of concern that it's hard to mention them. But I think the thing that's a great takeaway for people to think about is it's really, really, really important to celebrate the milestones of your life. And we have one life to live, and there's a lot of value in being able to mark our time on this planet with enjoyment and with milestones that show accomplishment and bring people together to celebrate those moments of joy. And for me, that's something that I've always known. But you know, walking away from the pandemic or walking through the pandemic or however you want to call it, I think, you know, it's not something that's frivolous. It's actually something really important. And I don't know that I ever was able to vocalize it in that way, but I see it as not just something that is a trifle, but something that is critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel that way about design, but that conversation has been had many times about design.
Right.
So you're to focus the conversation on events as, yeah, it's your, those big events, those big markers are the
Yep.
things, at my wedding.
And
And
also small events, small markers, you know, they don't all have to be for like 10,000 people. I mean, you know, when I got married, there were 9 people at it, and that was just as special to me as if there were 300.
yeah, what do you hire photographers? Are you part of,
I do. I do.
is that
So, you know, one
get people off their phones?
Well, that doesn't necessarily get them off their phones, but but we do hire photographers, and Aaron DeLessie, who is the wonderful photographer that worked with Jane Shulak and I on our book At the Artisan's Table, is somebody that I met, through working on events. I mean, he's a noted photographer within the wedding space, and we got along very famously, and he wanted to do something that was outside of the wedding space, and we wanted to make this book, and we held hands and went on this journey together. And but he brings something to the table that is very magical and a very special point of view that I don't know that I could get with my phone.
Yeah, of course. Professionals are doing something.
Yeah.
So when did you cook up the book? When did it and there she is. Hey Jane. When did you say, like, okay, we got this book now?
So Jane and I had the idea about 5 years ago, and we started by going to Europe with Aaron and photographing some objects in the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris, and also going to some artisan studios. And then we came back to New York and we made some sample tables, and we did this all as sort of a scouting endeavor to see if it kind of held together as an idea. And we found that it did. It was ambitious. We shot in a lot of different countries and all throughout the United States, and we worked with multiple different museums, from the Met to the Museum of Decorative Arts to the V&A in London. And I think what's really exciting about it is it's finding the connective tissue between objects that represent certain periods in history, certain styles, certain materials or ways of working, and finding that connective thread to people who are working today, artists that are working today, who are the contemporary expression of those ideas. None of us invent something out of the blue. I mean, it's built upon history that comes from before us, and we all do something new with it, but we're not in a vacuum. And so it's been really fun to see the relationship between historical objects and contemporary artisans, and then it's really fun to play with all of their work and make a new cake out of it all.
So Jane definitely seemed very object driven, given her background at the museum.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Is that how your process starts, or do you start with a palette, or does it change all the time?
I start more with what's the big idea. Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit more focused on, not so much from like a how-to standpoint, not to instruct people, but more from the standpoint of, what's the new idea that becomes the way we reframe the object, the way of working, the location that we're in. How do we find a conceptual framework in which to look at this in a new way? And then I start to layer in, objects or textures or palettes, and how do they talk to each other? Not just in terms of, their individual objectness, if you will, but how do they talk to each other in relation to that big idea of the story?
And as you said, it's exciting to get the living artisan's work sparking off of the historical objects.
Oh, absolutely.
So she sounds like the historian of the two of you, and you are the philosopher.
Perhaps. I mean, I think we both have that in each of us, but yes, Jane is very connected to the history of the objects and their relationship within the history of the decorative arts. Of course, I'm fascinated by that, and I love that too, but I'm probably coming at it more from the experiential standpoint. I think what makes it a wonderful collaboration is how, those two collide. So, in the way that chocolate and peanut butter collided to make a Reese's peanut butter cup, two great tastes that taste good together. Like, I think these things, when we collide, it creates a new way to look at things that, is not just historical and it's not just experiential, but the yin and yang of that give it weight and poetry and legs, if you will, like a lot of different layers in which to interpret something.
Because I'm a decorator,
Mm-hmm.
I get into compositions, which sometimes are
Mm-hmm.
stacked. Like I'll set a table and I sort of I'm hoping that it is as such. But what the way you describe it sounds so much more alive. Take the object and then like kind of let it go, let it loose, invest it, or let it invest the experience with whatever. Do you have a hierarchy of objects? I mean, are do you want everything to be used? Is some of it only to be seen? What's the approach?
No, I mean that's a fascinating, excellent question, Alexa. No, I don't have a way that it has to be. I think about it conceptually. I think about it like art making in a certain way. I'm making a composition, but it's dimensional,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm imagining you do think about it that way as well, right? But I'm also thinking about like what is the meaning behind it. And one of the things that Jane and I talked a lot about, and something that I'm really focused on, is how are we not just making a catalog?
Mm-hmm.
Like
And
how
how are
is there more? Well, there has to be meaning to it, right? There has to be like more conceptual meaning than just it's a series of nice things that look good together. That's wonderful.
that is the big wrestle match in design too, because you want
Right.
accrue a number of things that speak to each other, are fabulous together, that create composition, dimensional or not. But yeah, how do you justify the selection of that thing?
That's
How do
right.
you
And
arbitrary?
I mean, we had some inner rules that, we didn't necessarily like stick to a T, but some of my inner rules are like, what's old? You need to have something old so it doesn't all look like it was bought on Sunday at Pottery Barn. So like what's the old thing that has history, that there's the poetry of its history that's part of it? And how is that interacting with something new? How are we mixing high and low? And then, is there a meaning? Like, are the objects, the materials, the location, is it infused with meaning in some way that is above and beyond what it looks like? So, for example, when we look at the chapter that we have called Royalty, where, do you know Roberto Lugo and his ceramics?
No. Do I?
Um, you might. I mean, he is kind of a big deal. He makes these ceramics. He makes these ceramics that have portraits on them, but they're generally people from the hip hop community or from, they're black.
Portrait of Biggie with the crowd.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And he's, making a commentary in part about, who qualified to have a portrait made and who is royalty and who is elevated. And he wanted to see people that he admired in those places that were normally reserved for white people. So we presented his work in a space that was the old Michigan Theater in Detroit, that is, a colossal, incredible, crumbling, old, ornate theater that has now been turned into a parking garage. It's quite famous. You've probably seen a lot of pictures for it, but the relationship between this crumbling grandeur of what this royal space was at one time and the relationship between what Roberto is doing with his work today, there's a dialogue between that crumble and that creation that is an interesting paradox, if you will, right? And so that charges the work more than it's just like cool things to look at.
Totally. And
Does that make sense?
Totally. It's Velasquez meets Harper Ferry. Is that his name? Who did
Mm-hmm.
and then Andy Warhol. I mean, I suppose
Right.
a lot of Andy Warhol responded to is that same, taking those iconic poses and putting pop culture people on them, or just fancy people on them. Yeah.
That's right. And I think one of the things that Jane and I learned when we first started this, we did a lot of the setups in a studio and we created the environments, and some of those are in the book and they were great. But what we realized is that for the book to remain interesting, there needed to be a balancing act between created environments and places in the world that we could be in. And, we see this in a lot of magazines and books. I mean, there's a lot of stunning, gorgeous spaces in the world, but when they're charged with meaning that speaks to the artist or the period, and they're not so sincere, there's some kind of juxtaposition that makes that dialogue question something, then I think it becomes very exciting.
Yes, thank you, by the way, Shepard Fairey, yes. Now, here's a question. I agree with you 100% about that. Now, in order for it to do that and be interesting, does everybody who sees it have to understand?
Not necessarily, I don't think.
Yeah.
They feel it, right?
Yeah. Okay.
I think like when it works, you feel it. You don't necessarily need to know why and how it was constructed.
Because that can be very uninclusive if it requires the knowledge of it. You just need to see the magic happen. You don't need to understand the background. But without without the background story, the magic won't happen.
I think so. And I think sometimes, it can be obvious. Like, I'm really interested in the paradox, like the idea of a paradox. And so, we have another chapter that features the work of a potter from Wales named Philip Eglin, who makes beautiful handmade ceramics, but he juxtaposes images of popes and prostitutes.
Mm-hmm.
And, those things are not supposed to be together. But what'd you say?
Tarts and Vickers.
Mm-hmm. And, we shot that in an old abandoned church in Detroit. And while you might not know the story, you know that there's a paradox of all of those things working together. And I think that that's what makes it really fascinating when, it shouldn't work, but it does. And I do a lot of that in my events. I mean, a lot of the materials that I use are things that are really everyday materials that shouldn't be used in a certain way. But when you do use them in a very convincing way, they become magical. They become transformed.
Yeah.
I think that's what Yves Klein did. Like the Yves Klein International Blue is like,
totally.
Makes my heart beat, but it's, just like some pigment.
Yeah, my father worked for somebody who had the Venus de Milo. I saw it without knowing anything, at what age I was. But when I saw it, I didn't know anything about it, but I was arrested by it. I was.
It's like that thing.
Yeah.
Totally.
What I was going to ask you is you obviously respect for the artisan, for the object, for the craft. Do you try to not support, but like, are you trying to support these artisans in every way, or wherever you go, are you trying to find them to support them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the subtexts of the book is that the things that people make with their hands matter. And in this day and age where technology, which is of course wonderful, I mean, we all benefit from technology. We wouldn't be having this conversation now without the magic of technology. But for me, it makes the things that we make with our hands, and when you feel the heartbeat of somebody's hand in an object, you know, that's a really important thing to value and to hold up and to champion. Um, and I personally collect handmade items, and I feel like a room is not complete without a certain amount of them. And I do like to seek them out all over the world. And frankly, that's, you know, Jane and I share a love for that, and that's one of the things that inspired us. I mean, we first started doing that together because we enjoyed it, and then we realized that there was an idea there.
Mm-hmm. And a humanism.
And a humanism, and also like those handmade objects, they mark history and they mark time. And so if you look through our book, I mean, they're definitely the markings of ages of civilization. And, you know, there's a relationship to social, you know, values of the time and political situations and the realities of materials. You know, a lot of the innovations that happened in the decorative arts happened in relation to wars and shortages of materials in wars. You know, people got involved in making things out of faience because the metal was not available because of wars. So they needed to figure out another way to make a candlestick because all of their metal had to be, you know,
Right.
melted down
Redeploy.
to use for arms.
Yeah.
So,
So
you
it's
know,
like a Russian doll concept markers. Your
mhm.
event marking of the demarcation, and then the people that are marking history, time, evolution, progress, fun conversation and conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty fascinating. And, you know, I think we got really into it in the book in ways that were not expected. And, you know, it really first started as a decorative idea, but we realized more and more as we delved into it that, you know, a lot of the choices that artists made over time had to do with other things that were going on in the world. And, and they've become you know, like we asked ourselves, like, why do all these dishes have flies on them? You know, well, a fly was on a dish not because it was like a big decorative idea, but, you know, the porcelain was so expensive that when it broke or had a crack,
Mm-hmm.
it was a way for them to mend, you know, they didn't want to away because it was expensive and there was value. And so they covered blemishes or cracks with insects. And it ultimately just became a thing. But, you know, it started as a necessity. I mean, it was
Yeah.
a decorative answer to a necessity, which is ultimately, I think, how a lot of design comes into play,
Yeah.
right? Like it's an answer to a need.
Yeah. Did you read The Hair with the Amber Eyes?
I did not. Should I?
Oh my God. I'm so excited for you. It's by Edmund Val, the
Uh-huh.
ceramicist, but it is about his family's collection of net skis, and he
Uh-huh.
uses the collection to trace his family's life um, from I want to say they were originally Russian Jews who ended up in then Vienna, and then
Mm-hmm.
all hell broke loose. Anyway, you have to read it because it will be especially
Okay.
meaningful to you given this conversation. It's a very
Okay.
heady, you'll love it.
I will
And
order it tonight.
what?
I will order it tonight.
And I will be looking at the artisan's table. So congratulations.
Thank
I'm
you.
so happy for you and Jane that it is out into the universe.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you very, very much for the chat today. It was super fun.
yeah. How many books have you done?
This is my sixth book, weirdly enough, which I
Okay, well
kind of can't believe, but
I'm gonna get them all because it's only
okay.
worth more is more. And yeah, somebody just asked.
Thank
It's
you.
called At the Artisan's Table. And who published it?
Vendome Press.
Vendome, which is Vendome is fantastic. Um,
Yeah.
all right,
We've
wonderful.
been very lucky to partner with them. Well, thank you very, very much. I'm a big fan of yours, so it's a very wonderful pleasure to chat today. And
Pleasure. And thank you for
Sorry that
doing this in Switzerland.
and I'm sorry that our airwaves are a little bit funky, but at least we've been able to talk even if the visuals aren't always clear. So, but anyway, let's plan your own trip.
Yes,
We'll do your
please.
own 6 day
And
experience.
only
So,
only for me it will be all fondue, all the fondue and raclette nonstop.
okay, it's a date.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh,
Kisses and good luck.
Thank you.